So today in this video, we're going to discuss some more connections between Yahweh and Enki and how a Neteru is hidden in the New Testament of the Bible and possibly even in parts of the Old Testament and other extra biblical texts. Now, for the connections between Yahweh and Enki, I'm going to start by going over a few things that I've already addressed. And that is that I believe that Yahweh, the God of the Israelites, the God from Canaan, one of the Elohim. I believe he is the Anunnaki God that we know as Enki or Yah or Ea. And we know that there is a linguistic connection or an etymological connection between Yahweh and Enki, or his name is Haya, because he is also known as Haya, and Haya is a god of life. Now, as I've said, the linguistics reveal the likeness. So we know what kind of God Enki is. We know what kind of God Yahweh is. They are gods of life. And they are gods that are also considered craftsman deities. Enki is also a creator craftsman deity, and Yahweh is a creator craftsman deity. They both create life in their creation stories, or they are helped by other gods like the Anunnaki in Enki's story or the Elohim in Yahweh's story. And we see that these two gods and Kotawakasis, which is another variant of this same deity that is seen in Ugarit. So when Yahweh is worshipped in Ugarit, I believe that he went under the title Kotawakasis, aka Hayanu, which is another equivalent deity to Enki, Haya. And we see that Enki is called Haya all the way up until the end of the widespread worship of the Anunnaki, when really I think that it's that the Anunnaki worship was continued through the Elohim. But we see that the Hurrians and the Hittites and others in the Arabian Peninsula even called him Haya or Ea, and even Ian. And as I told y'all in the previous video, Ian translates to John, and John means Yah is gracious. And as we know, Yah is both Enki and Yahweh. They are both considered Yah, a shortened version of Haya, which is their name. That's the name of Yahweh. That's the name of Enki. And that's also one of the names of Kotawakasis. And we see that in the book of Genesis, Yahweh is the one that is assisting Noah in building the ark and even helping Noah close the doors to the ark. We see that Enki is the one that is helping Atrahasis, Ziazudra, and Utnapishtim with their ark, or with their boat, with their craft to get out of the flood. And we see that it is the other Anunnaki that is causing the flood in the Anunnaki stories, or in the Sumerian stories, or the Babylonian and Akkadian and Assyrian stories. But then we also see that it is the Elohim that are causing the flood in the Bible by the choice of words that they choose to use, because language is important to these people. Their semantics didn't mean nothing. Their semantics had specifics. So when they use a specific word or terminology, they meant it in a specific cultural way that is only known to the ancient Near East. So when they are talking like this, when they use words like this is the God of life, or this is the God of thunder, that's why we can see, for example, Baal Hadad be Ishkur, Adad, Teshub, Hadad, Baal Haman, Baal Shaman. You know what I'm saying? We see all these different variants of Baal, and that's because these are all representing the same function. The deity functions as a deity of thunder. Yahweh functions as a deity of life, just as Enki does, just as he did under the term Hayanu. This is relevant to life. But we also see that Yahweh and Enki and Hayanu, aka Kotawakasis, are craftsman deities, and we see Yahweh is a craftsman deity. And this is hinted at even at the other definition of his name, which is to blow, where we see that Yahweh has some type of metallurgy type feats to him when we see him in Edom and Israel. So when Yahweh is being worshipped in Canaan, he is a craftsman deity just like Enki, just like Kotawakasis. When Yahweh is being worshipped in Canaan, he is a life-giving deity just like Enki, just like Kotawakasis. When Yahweh is being worshipped in Canaan, he is saving specific people from the flood just like Enki. He is associated with birth goddesses just like Enki, just like Kotawakasis. He is doing the feats of Enki. He is doing the feats of Kotawakasis. He is participating in stories that Kotawakasis was in, for example. The stories with Yam and the stories with the council meetings and Baal Hadad and all those stories that I told you guys about. Yahweh is taking those stories, or the Israelites, for to be more precise, they are taking these stories and giving these stories to Yahweh as the dominant character or as the main character in these stories, when really, as Kotawakasis, he was still a main player in this story, but he wasn't the main character. That's just the thing. That's what henotheism brings you. It brings you that type of main character energy, you know what I'm saying? But we see Yahweh giving the blueprints to build temples. And we see the same thing in the Eridu Genesis story. We see a lot of these parallels. We see the same thing in the Enuma Elish. We see that these gods have these type of creator deities that can help build cities and build palaces and temples and even help construct boats. These are the things that these gods had in common, and it's by no coincidence. The only coincidences that you could really say is truly a coincidence is that a flood happened, because the flood narrative was reoccurring because of many floods in the area. But the role that these deities played in that narrative hasn't changed. It hasn't changed when it comes to these specific groups. And we even see that other deities in the Bible can be traced back to the same areas that we find the evidence of Enki being Haya, or there being this consecutive worship of Enki in other places under the name Haya, such as in Ebla. The Eblites had a god named Haya, and they also had a god named Kamish, or Kamash, as we know in the Bible, or Zizu as we know in the Ugaritic text. Kamash, or Shamash, is the Moabite god, but he was also worshipped before Moab. Before that, just as Yahweh was, just as many of the deities that we consider Elohim, they were worshipped before Canaan, before Israel. We also see that we have Milcom, who is known as Malak or Malik in Ebla. And this is another Elohim that we see found in the Bible, that we see found in Canaan, found in Ugarit. Milcom, or Milkamu, is another example of the same thing that is going on with Yahweh, the same thing that is going on with El, the same thing that is going on with Baal Hadad. El is also seen in Ebla. We know these things. We see that El is seen in Syria. He is Asher. That is why his consort is named Asherah. That's where that name comes from, because she is originally known in Ugarit as Atarat. But we know that these gods have their counterparts, or they have their origin in older, more deep and antiquity, in older cultures, older nations, older traditions. And speaking of older traditions, there's another deity that I mentioned earlier that was a Neteru that is hinted to in the New Testament and in parts and bits of the Old Testament through synchronization with other deities like Tammuz. But the deity I'm talking about is Asar, also known as Osiris. He is analogous to Lazarus. Lazarus, when translated back to Hebrew, because we know Lazarus appears in the Greek part of the Bible, which is the New Testament, and even in the Septuagint, that's the whole Greek Bible. We know that Lazarus translates in Hebrew to El Azar. El Azar, that is God Azar. That is Osiris. Because they are pulling on the trope of him being a dying and rising God, just as Tammuz is, just as they are trying to make Yeshua be. But in order to do this, they have to bring down the other gods, as they always have done. And they didn't want to bring down Tammuz because I told you of the significant connection he has to Yahweh through synchronization with Dumuzi, who is the son of Enki, who may be Yahweh. They didn't want to go that route, so they chose to pick on Asar. But Asar is just the Neteru variant of Tammuz. Or I also vouch for him being the Neteru version of Asaluhi, but that's for another video. Right now I'm focused on him being analogous to Lazarus, as we see is brought back from the dead. That's what they are trying to do. They are mocking, but also trying to have Yeshua, or Jesus in this case, because this is the amalgamated person or entity that we know as Jesus, that is amalgamating things from Osiris, such as his dying and rising feats, which is not just something that Osiris did, but he was the main one. Asar was the main one. Any type of dying and rising god could have been seen as an Asarian or an Osiris type deity. But we also see that Jesus / Yeshua is amalgamated from Osiris Christus, which is a deity that is the combination of Osiris and Apis and Zeus. And they added the Christus to say that he was the anointed or chosen God that was the shepherd to those people. And we can also trace Yeshua / Jesus back to another deity named Yatha or Yesha, which is a deity or an Elohim found in the Arabian Peninsula, which is a savior deity that is very similar to Yeshua. But I'm not going to say that Yeshua wasn't a real person, but I will say that that deity was probably used as part of the amalgamation of Jesus' character that we know in the mainstream. But the main point that I was trying to get at is that we see that Asar is being hinted to when we mention Lazarus in the New Testament. And then we also see that Asar is being hinted to when they mention Tammuz in the Old Testament.